I'm a very small person, so I should stand on stage so at least you can see me. First and foremost, I want to thank the organizers for inviting me here. What I'm going to share is actually the story of the Malays in Australia. This is part of my current research. I'm actually doing research on Malays outside the Malay world, focusing on Australia, London, Dubai, and Toronto. So what I'm going to just share with you about is basically on Malays in Australia, the history of the Malays in Australia, for us to understand why the Malays are here, what have they done in this country, and perhaps I can also give some perspectives on what the Malays can do for Australia. So just to begin, the topic of my presentation, we have eaten so much, some of us are feeling quite sleepy right now. What I'm about is basically the history of Australia in 3 keys. And I use the word keys to mean 2 things. Keys as in the key to unlock the history of the Malays, and key from the perspective of music. You know, when you play piano, you have all the keys, and the Malays have gone through 3 keys or 3 phases in their journey in Australia. So I want to begin by talking about Malays and Australia, how the Malays encountered Australia for many hundreds of years without some of us knowing. Malays as Australians, and I'm sure some of you here are Australians, some permanent residency. Get my permanent residency soon if I can get a job in Australia. And of course, Malays for Australia. How Malays can do their part to build a stronger, or as they say in Australia, a stronger Australia. So let me begin by saying that the history of the Malays in Australia is not a recent history. There are books that has been written by academics based in Griffith University. This lady by the name of Regina Ganter, and I'm sure council here might know her. She has written a lot on Malays in Australia and found that the Malays in Australia has been in continent for as early as the 16th century. So if you look at it from an objective history, here much more longer than any other community in Australia. And the earliest Malays to have come to Australia are the Makassaris Malays, or people from the island of Makassar, which we call now as Indonesia. We know that the Malays come to Australia because amongst the Malays, and I'm sure many Malays here would have known, there is this concept amongst the Malays called the merantau. Anybody here knows the meaning of merantau? If you're Malay and you don't know, I'm going to shoot you. What is the meaning of merantau, doctor? Merayap. He says merantau is merayap. That's not really correct. What is merantau? Merantau basically going overseas, or if you want to say it in a more descriptive way, to venture. As we say, as Metallica once said in their song, wherever I may roam, wherever I may wander. And this is something that the Malays have in their DNA. In the Malay saying, they say, di mana bumi dipijak, di situ langit dijunjung. We hear the song just now by M. Nasir, which basically translates as, wherever I may roam, the sky above me is what I will uphold. So the Malays, they are fond of venturing. And one of the places that they ventured to is basically Australia. They began their journeys in the northern part of Australia. And as you can see, this map is not very clear. I was supposed to show you the routes that the Malays have taken. The Malays were the first, before Marco Polo, to have traveled to around the world. They were the first basically. And Australia is basically one of those places. If you have a husband who likes to go out at night, you know where he got it from. It's basically the merantau and the merayap problem that they have, right? And of course, if you go to northern Australia, to the northern territories, until today, the Aborigines still use the word rupiah to refer to money. Why do they use these words? And if you look at the languages of the Aborigines in the north, many Malay words are embedded into the language of the Aborigines. Why? Because the Aborigines have been exposed to the Malays for more than 400 to 500 years. So Malays who are here today, one of those things, if you forget everything that I'm going to share with you today, remember, your history in Australia began 600 to 500 years ago. And you must be proud of this history. It is a history that has been documented, and it is a history that bears testimony that you are not recent migrants, as some people would like to call the Malays here. You have been around for a long time. And of course, if you are interested to know more about the stories of the Malays here, you can read this book by Marshall Clark and Sally May. They talk about how the Makassar people, anybody here from the island of Makassar? Malaysia, sometimes Malays don't even know which island they are from. But the Makassaris, they continue to shape basically the history of the of the Australians in Australia. So that's the first phase, Malays and Australia. The history of the Malays in Australia in the early years were forgotten. Why? Because of the forgotten history of the Aborigines. With the wiping out of the Aborigines in Australia, people forget that Malays have been here as long as the Aboriginal peoples as well. So I'm going to move to the next stage. Once that first group of people or the first group of Malays have been wiped out from the history of Australia, there was a second wave of Malays that came to this part of the world. Those people see themselves not only as Malays, but also as Australians. And here, we are talking about from the 1820s, the people who lived in what we call as Christmas Island. The Malays in Christmas Island, one of which is my own uncle, said that they love Christmas Island because every day is Christmas. So for them, living in Kukos Island or Christmas Island is an island full of joy and holidays. The story is actually far more complex. The Malays were actually brought there as indentured laborers. They were Malays from the Riau Islands, Malays from Java, and Malays from every part of the Malay world. They went to the Kukos Islands and became part of that island. Many actually stayed there until today. I don't know, how many of you here have been to Kukos Island before? You are not a true Australian if you have not been to Christmas Island. Because that is the very origins of the new wave of Malays in Australia. You can see, because of the Merantau culture, Malays actually traveled more than 2,600 miles or kilometers to come to many parts of Australia, especially Christmas Island. And if you go to Christmas Island today, the stamps that are produced in Christmas Island would have pictures of Malays. So Malays are not only in Christmas Island, they are basically shaping the story of Australia through their presence in Christmas Island. So you can see pictures of Malays getting married. I mean, this is something that Malays like to do, to get married. There is a saying in Malay, bersatu kita teguh, bercerai kawin lagi. Which basically means, if we are united, we are strong. If we are divided, just marry again. Right? And we all know in the Malay community, marriage and remarriage is a culture, basically. This is a picture of Malays having their usual entertainment, one of which is dancing. And of course, Malays eating their favorite fruit, which is durian. I wonder why there was no durian today. Something is wrong. Right? Eating durians and bringing durians basically to Kukos Island. I think they even planted durians on Kukos Island as well. And of course, after this Kukos Island community has established themselves, then came the Javanese laborers from some parts of Java into Queensland. So the Malays in Queensland were actually Javanese from Java. From 1880s, more and more Javanese were brought into this part of Australia to work in sugar plantations. Some of them, I was told, have forgotten the fact that they are actually Javanese. When you actually ask these people, they just say that they are Malays. So 1880s onwards, Malays started filling up Queensland. Again, if you are interested to read more into this, do read this book by Nahid Kabir. She talks about minorities in Australia and she focuses also on the Javanese. You can see by the 1950s onwards, the Javanese were marrying into other communities. What you see here is basically a hybrid. Mother is a Malay, mother-in-law is Pakistani, son-in-law is mixed Malay and some other races. And of course, the daughter-in-law is Lebanese. So you have what we call in the Malay world as a roja, a mixed hybrid of people who look like so many races. Yeah, I'm a product of a rojak marriage myself. My father is Arab, my mother is Indian, and we all speak Malay. So Australia is a reflection of what is happening basically in the Malay world. And of course, because Malays already saw themselves as Australians, from the 1970s onwards, there were many organizations that were established by the Malays to pack themselves to this country. This is an organization in New South Wales. They call themselves the MAN, or the Malay Australian Association of New South Wales. We have the Australian Malay Foundation. If you all don't know about it, now you know. We have the Kampong Utara Melbourne. I was there a few months ago, and they are still very Malay. They still have their usual Malay kanduris. They still have their usual Malay gatherings. And of course, you have a lot of studies that have been done now on the Malays, concentrating largely on the Malays in Perth. My own family basically is now based in Perth. As they say, if you don't like the kampong in Malaysia, you can go to the kampong in Perth. Because the kampong in Perth is far more Malay than the Malays in Malaysia and Singapore. In fact, for the Singaporeans here, if you miss the curtains that you used to have in the 1980s, they still keep it in Perth. Right? So they are what I call as hardcore Malay. Right? So you have a lot of studies on the Malays in Australia, and I'm sure our counsellor here, she knows this. In 2011 census, Australians reported around 300 different ancestries. This is an amazing country, if you ask me. London, where I used to stay for about 2 years, had only 150 different ethnic groups. Australia alone has about 300. Of the total ancestry that you see in Australia, 33,620 said that they are Malays. So currently, there are 33,000 Malays who have registered themselves as Australians. As we all know, Malays breed like rabbits. They have a lot of children. I have 6 myself, right? And these numbers, which was just 5 years ago, has increased exponentially. So we have more than around 45,000 Malays in the whole of Australia. The numbers are growing, and they feel that Australia is the place where they would like to contribute their energies and their resources to. We will talk about my 6 children later on. I just want to finish up by saying that Malays in Australia should not only see themselves as Australians. Malays in Australia must live, breathe, work, think, and also imagine themselves to be doing everything and anything for Australia. When I was studying in the UK, we have young British Muslims who do not identify themselves with Britain. This problem that we have in Europe may just affect our Malays in Australia. So my hope is that the Malays start to feel that Australia is not the place where they find new life, but the place where they feel and fight for their lives. So you have Malays now, and I'm sure some of you belong to these categories. Malays who are academics in Australia, Malays who are engineers, Malays who are lawyers, doctors, nurses, businesses. My cousin is in the armed forces in Australia. And of course, we have a lot like Amerizal, who's in the oil and gas industry. In Melbourne, many of the Malays are actually in the airline industry. So Malays are practically everywhere, helping to build this country. And this country loves the Malays for helping this country to grow. Now, how do we contribute more to Australia is the question that we need to ask. And to answer this question, my answer would be, we need to be more cosmopolitan. What do I mean by cosmopolitan? As Malays, we must not only think about our own community. We need to think about other communities. We need to reach out. We need to call other people to understand us. We need to open up our houses to the Australians. We need to talk to the whites, to the browns, to the reds, to the blue. I don't know whether there's even blue people around. And bring them closer to our culture. We have a problem, and I'm sure the councillor knows this, in Sydney, where communities ghettoize themselves. And we don't want that to happen to the Malays. So my recent book, my upcoming book, which is going to be out in November, tries to argue for the point that Malays must open up their doors, must open up their minds, must open up their hearts for other people. Why? Because the Imam who was giving the talk just now said it very, very potently. In the Quran, it is clear. Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wal untha wa ja'alnakum syu'uban wa qabaila lita'arafu inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. That we, Allah says to us, God says to us, to the Malays, to the Muslims, that we have created you to know other people, to tell other people about what you are, and to understand other people. If there's one thing that makes the Malays different from all races all over the world, it is that the Malays can accept anybody and everybody to be a Malay. We say in Malay, sesiapa sahaja boleh menjadi Melayu tetapi tidak sebaliknya, which means everyone can be a Malay but not otherwise. I am an Arab who has Indian ancestry. I can become a Malay. Can a Malay become an Arab? No way, because the Arabs have a close identity. A Chinese who married into the Malay community, who speaks the Malay language, who has adopted Islam, can that Chinese become a Malay person? Yes. Can the Malay become a Chinese? 不可以嘞，不可以。So beautiful. If you think about the Malay identity, it is an open, accepting, and cosmopolitan identity. I just want to end by saying that Malays will always and still call Australia their home. We want to build a new generation of Malay youths that would do everything for Australia and remain Malay, remain back to Islam, and feel for humankind in general. I hope that through this presentation, you will also help us to promote the Malay culture to all the other people in Australia. May the Malays succeed with all of Australia to build this place as our home. Thank you very much.
As a Malay person, I feel so inspired. All right, I've got a quick question. Just one quick question. Can you turn the lights on, please? And this is one question I have reserved until I meet the right person. And this is the right person, right? Is it true that a Malay husband, amongst all the other husbands, love their wife so much?
Yes.
Yes. The reason why, okay, I'll tell you my reason and whether you actually agree, and you tell me your reason. My wife's mother, or my mother-in-law, did actually tell my wife, he said, you are so lucky to be marrying a Malay guy. Because judging at the number of women in those gold souk on the old, remember the gold shops? You know, it's all about love. So you see this man, Malay men, especially in Singapore, Malaysia, with their wife, having all of the gold glittered, all right, from head to toe. Yes?
So there is actually a Malay saying that is found in Aceh actually. Aceh is the northern part of Sumatra, where the Malays would always say, sayang anak buang-buangan, sayang istri ditinggal-tinggalkan. Which is translated as, if you love your child, send him away where he can learn new knowledge. And if you love your wife, leave her. And when they say tinggalkan, that doesn't mean that you leave her ultimately. You leave her so that you miss her, and when you go back, you love her again. In the Malay community, and I say this to my fellow Singaporeans, the women is always on top. The women are always on top. Women are respected beyond everybody else. If you travel to Minangkabau, the culture of the Minangkabau is such that inheritance go to the women. And that's why if you look at Malay families, the father may act tough, but at the end of the day, the mother calls the shots. I just want to give you one more joke. There is one, I love the Malays with a passion to a point of marrying one of them, right? And the Malay women has one weapon that no Malay man or whether Australian, Afghanistani can ever fight against. When they are angry with you, the Malay women, they will keep quiet and you will die. You will die. And this is something for those who have married the Malays, you must know this. The weapon of the Malay women is silence. And that's why, as the British people would say, silence is golden. The Malay women would say, silence is a weapon. So, if you think about it, the Malay society is a society that is unique. Why? Because they uphold the status of women. And little wonder that one of the presidents of Indonesia was a woman, Megawati Soekarno. When we are debating about whether women should be the head of state, the Indonesians have already done it. So I hope that you will assist me in my research on the Malays in Australia. I will send out some of the interview forms to some of you if you have time. I hope you will help me to understand why the Malays are here and what they can do for Australians, inshallah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi. That was very knowledgeable and good presentation. Bagus. Yes.